Welcome everyone to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinars. I'm Brian Gilbert, NCIA's Director of Engagement and Experience. And as always, I'm thrilled to welcome you all to the second episode of our new multi-part Committee Insight series, with this edition being brought to you by our Scientific Advisory Committee. We're at a pivotal moment in the cannabis industry with the potential rescheduling of cannabis to a Schedule III drug. And in today's webinar, Committee Insights, Advancing Cannabis Science, Research Opportunities and Challenges Post-Rescheduling, we will be delving into the significant changes and opportunities for scientific research and consumer safety following this anticipated change. This session is designed to provide vital insights for researchers and product developers in particular, but as well as all overall industry stakeholders who are aiming to advance their scientific efforts and maintain high standards of consumer safety in a newly regulated environment. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome back Casson Coleman, Chair of NCIA's Scientific Advisory Committee, as well as the recipient of NCIA's Steve Fox Excellence in Advocacy Award, presented at our lobby days last month in Washington, D.C. Great to have you here moderating yet another insightful and informative conversation. With that, I'll turn it right over to you, Cass, to introduce yourself and in turn introduce the panelists and dive into today's convo.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm really glad to be here with everybody today. As Brian said, I'm Casson Coleman, current chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee here at NCIA, and a proud advocate for education and positive quality standards in the cannabis industry. Along here with me today, we have Carly Bader. Carly, can you tell the team a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no problem at all. Hi, I'm Carly Bader. I'm here in Denver, Colorado. We are working together with NCIA to bring science to the community at large here today, so I'm very excited. I have a background in molecular microbiology from Florida and have my master's in biomedical sciences and infectious disease. I worked at two different research universities, including Anschutz Medical here in Colorado, and now work with a private company, Willow Industries, who is driving towards helping consumers as well as cultivators understand microbial contamination so that we can have healthy quality products on the shelves for all users.
Awesome, thanks, Carly. And Dr. Shelby Lane, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, yes. Good morning, and thank you, Cass. Thank you, crew and committee here. So I'm live here from Detroit, Michigan, and I am a medical doctor. I've been an emergency physician. Actually, I'm a recovering emergency physician from all the trauma I've gone through all my life. And as a recovering emergency physician, I delved into cannabis. As a cannabis physician, I've been certifying cannabis patients in Michigan since about 2014. I've been a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee for NCIA since 2015. And I've seen the ups and downs of the cannabis industry in terms of patients who need help, patients who can't get help, patients who've been in jail, patients who've been part of the whole system. And so this is very important to me because I understand that as a plant and as a medicine, it is very useful. And so I'm here to help with the rescheduling process in any way I can. And this is a great time to be alive, to be able to talk about this. Thank you.
So true. The things that are happening today, I wasn't sure I'd see in my lifetime. And last but not least, the illustrious Kenny Alexandra, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the committee you're here representing today?
Hey guys, I'm Kenya. I'm an accounting professional. That's what I do in the industry, but I'm here representing the DEI committee because DEI should be a part of every conversation that we're having. I am super excited to be here and offer a different lens. I recently participated with the University of Maryland in a course that is directly related to kind of the conversation we're going to be having now, and it's communicating science to people who don't have science backgrounds. So I'm super excited that I get to be a part of this conversation with all of these wonderful people, and I'm excited to get started.
Well, that's excellent. So as we get started, Brian's going to throw up some slides for us and allow Dr. Shelby Lane to kind of take us through where we were and where we're going.
All right, thank you very much. So we're talking about rescheduling. And so currently cannabis is part of Schedule 1, which means that it is part of this group of drugs you see here in front of you. So I'll go through Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Schedule 1 includes heroin and LSD. It also includes marijuana. It also includes drugs that they say have no medical benefit. So that's why we're trying to leap out of Schedule 1 into Schedule 3 with rescheduling. Is descheduling a better choice? Possibly, but this is where we are today. And Schedule 2 includes drugs like oxycodone, hydrocodone, cocaine, and all the drugs you see here, including Ritalin. Next is Schedule 3, which is where we're trying to reschedule marijuana so that we can figure out if it's has what the abuse potential is, what is the a medical potential, and can we do medical research? And Schedule 3 also includes some tax incentives for 280E, but just in terms of being a controlled substance, Schedule 3 is where we've found ourselves with Congress since April, and now since May, I think May 21st. And we're looking to have all comments from the public by July 22nd of this year. So that's a short period of time. Schedule 4 is very short, very short. And then there comes Xanax and Klonopin and Valium and Ambien, another schedule of drugs. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that there are some cannabis products that are currently on Schedule 5, and that does include things such as Epidiolex, Marinol, the synthetic THC, drugs for cancer and appetite, and for people who have appetite suppression, or and also Setbacks, which is used for MS. So this is the scheduling. If you didn't know it, you know it now. And this is what we're trying to push. The better choice might be descheduling, but we're going to go through the steps that are required by the federal government and the FDA and the DEA and Health and Human Services to get properly positioned and then move forward. So it's a process.
Just in case people missed that was like 6 different groups working together to do this one thing.
Right.
Talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
All right. So in order to get this done, in order for rescheduling to actually happen, the process for a controlled substance has to be initiated by the DEA, Health and Human Services, and through a petition by an interested party, which we've gone through that process. But to reschedule a controlled substances, Health and Human Services has to evaluate it through the FDA and prepare a recommendation to the Attorney General. And this is going to be based on scientific and medical considerations and the potential public health impact. So just so you understand, there's a lot of words that mean a lot of things from a lot of different agencies, but the process is step by step by step. So it can get stuck at any part of the process. So when considering the rescheduling of a controlled substance, the DEA conducts this 8-factor analysis to evaluate the substance's abuse potential, medical use, and safety. So the DEA actually considers the Health and Human Services recommendations as part of the overall 8-factor analysis, and they must accord significant deference to Health and Human Services scientific and medical determinations. So we're into like a scientific and political land of confusion. I just want to say that because as I'm learning this, and I didn't know all this had to happen because I've never gone through trying to get a controlled substances reschedule, it is complicated. So that's why we need everybody's help. So these are parts of the 8-factor analysis. So it's a lot of words, it's a lot of work, but the slides will be available. One is the actual or relative potential for abuse. So do we have data on that? This is what they're going to be looking for. They need epidemiological studies, they need case reports, they need data from law enforcement and medical sources, of which medical sources are very few. I'll stop here to say that only 9% of medical schools or even nursing schools have a program that even addresses the endocannabinoid system. So the research is far apart and limited. Next, the second part is scientific evidence of the pharmacological effects and the general pharmacology. So this is pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So this is where we have to bring in our PhDs, our pharmacists. We have to look at the research that's available. Is there research currently? Not necessarily in the United States, maybe University of Mississippi, but not necessarily. But it is out there, and there are lots of places that are doing some research now, but we're going to move even faster with Schedule 3. Number 3 is the state of the current scientific knowledge regarding the controlled substance. Do we have that information? Not yet. Next is its history and current pattern of abuse. So marijuana has been demonized. We've been trying to get this here to this state since 1970. So because it's been demonized, the history and current pattern of abuse has been controlled by agencies that say negative things about marijuana. It's very negative. The pattern is negative. So we're trying to get to a point where with marijuana as being a real medicine that we can actually prove through pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and genomics of the plant, genomics of the human being, or whatever animal we're going to use. We need this data, and that's why this is important. Next slide. So the last 4 are the 8-factor analysis, the scope, duration, and significance of the abuse. So they'll look into that. They'll look at the risk to public health, if any, and I think they'll probably look at things such as the unborn. They'll look at pregnant women. They'll look at children. So that data may come into play here. Next is the psychic or psychological dependence liability, and there is some data on that. And as an emergency physician, I know that we collect data all the time about who's coming into the ER, what drugs have you been on, is this problem related to cannabis or any other drug? So they will probably be pulling emergency department records for that. And then whether the substance is an immediate precursor of a substance already controlled. I can't answer that, but I could say possibly alcohol or tobacco. So that's the end of my summary of the 8-factor analysis. So I'll turn it back to you, Cass.
Yeah, or in that last one, an example might be like methyl ethyl ketone as an immediate precursor to making methamphetamines.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Exciting things. So let's fast forward and pretend we've already finished all the 8 factors. We've gotten through the hurdles in the legal sphere. Everything is finished with a public comment period. And now here we are. Cannabis is now Schedule 3. What could that possibly mean for researchers around the country? This slide, I think, captures that nicely, and I really like Carly to step in on this. I just want to cover the highlights, right? So if you're not already registered and you want to get registered for Schedule 1, there are 7 steps to approval. For every other schedule, there's only 4, right? If you want to do Schedule 1, you have to have an in-depth research protocol with all the appropriate drug codes, and you have to define every step of the process that you're going to do, from where you're acquiring it to where you're storing it, how you're getting it, etc. You do not have to have that same level of detail for any other schedule. If you're Schedule 1, you cannot have coincident activities happening. Each individual activity that you're performing has to be individually registered, licensed with that same level of 7-step approval. Right? For every other schedule, that's not required, right? For Schedule 1, and I think some Schedule 2s, every single thing you have to do has to use the DEA Form 222. That means anytime you order anything, and in the case for cannabis, the only place you can order it from is the DEA, and the only place they're getting this cannabis from is NIDA, from a single farm that's been approved by the DEA to grow it. For every other schedule, that's not the case. You can do those coincident activities, including growing research and development materials, manufacturing and processing the research development materials, testing those research development materials, building clinical trials around those research and development materials, as long as, of course, you're working with your internal review boards in the FDA, right? So these are some pretty substantial differences between the 2 categories. We fast forwarded, okay, we're like 18 months in the future. What can we start preparing for today? Continuing to be regulated by the DEA, but being able to do tasks that we were never able to do before, because getting the 7 steps of approval for Schedule 1 was something that didn't happen for cannabis, except for in a handful of cases. For instance, there's only 1 cultivator that's ever been registered and approved, as an example. Carly, can you talk a little bit more about how your research experience would have been impacted by things staying in Schedule 1 and all the cool things that you could do if it was rescheduled?
Yeah, I mean, as I looked through these, bullet points, every single one of them is a heavier and heavier and heavier weight on the ability to do research, really a shackle for each one of these bullet points. And rescheduling really will break the ties of these abilities, really be able to, use each individual research capability at these universities, and then break down the barriers of these invisible borders between us. I think that is also really important when it comes to peer reviewing and really working collaboratively between universities. Right now, universities have to work together within their own state. There's no transfer of material that can happen across invisible state lines, whether that state is legal in any way, shape, or form, or completely, at this point, illicit. So really, moving from Schedule 1, which really just is an elephant on the chest of all of us, to Schedule, 3, 4, 5, descheduling, really opens the ability, and honestly, some of the, negative associations around doing this research. I myself, when I was at Anschutz, went to one very small seminar on the use of cannabis in kind of a clinical setting, and very few people showed up. It was probably one of the least attended that I'd seen. I think people really were not always able to show their face. And it is why I stepped out of the research and the university setting, because I'm able to, at my company, do internal research. Again, only held within Colorado, product that is grown in Colorado. But it really was something I could have never brought onto the university, grounds. And even still this day, the universities have incredible capabilities within their technologies. And I would love to have some samples run using their technologies. And we have to always have that conversation of, well, is it below 0.3%? Is it hemp? Is it cannabis? And really, in all honesty, they're just too afraid to even have it come on site because of that concern.
So true. Wow. Thank you for giving that perspective. I'm seeing some people add questions in the chat. I just want to let you guys know there is a question and answer function, so your question doesn't get lost. If you put it there, that then lets us answer it. We can type to it. We can respond to the questions live during the webinar. We're going to try to get the ones that are happening in the chat, but sometimes there's a lot going on in there and we miss things. If we have it in the Q&A, we're not going to miss it. So I would like to know how Kenya is feeling about all of what we just talked about as an outsider looking in on the science we're doing. What kind of questions do you have that we've just started to answer today?
It's so funny because yesterday when we did our run through, I thought I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, I get this. And then coming here, I'm like, okay, wait, what? Wait a minute. So I guess from my perspective, I'm just like, what do we need to do? What do we actually need to do to kind of guide the research, and how do we make sure that the diverse cannabis community is being represented in that research once it starts happening? Because I think that we have a unique opportunity in that we're an industry that hasn't existed, right? We're a brand new industry. This is like a once in a lifetime opportunity to build this from the ground up. So I guess what do we need to do? What does this look like?
Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Kenya, that's a really important question. And I think as we look at this, as we go down the road, we have to frame it. And the proper framing is going to be necessary from the agency side and the governments that are all involved. So how do we help them frame it so that they're not glossing over it and putting a stigma back on it? So that's the government agency side. It's important that people go to the comments for regulatory.gov and leave your comment. I started reading some of those comments yesterday, and there's still a lot of haters out there saying, why are we doing this? This is not important. This is not for real. So there's that agency, government, political side. And as Brian mentioned, and Cass and I, we've been to Congress. We go to lobby days. We talk to Congress. There's an important piece that has to be informed and educated and get knowledge as well. Then there is the public opinion side. So because I see patients every day, the opinion is still with patients, marijuana is no good. If you ask them, they may or may not tell you about it. When I talk about certification, they think they don't need that anymore. Okay, it's recreational or from the weed guy. So that's still part of the problem. So it's a big educational thing that has to happen. And I think when we get to research, universities, academics, dispensaries, MSOs, all of those have to be involved in how we're going to get research done. It needs to be a formula and a process that is actually translated from state to state, university to university. We need a same language, because I can tell you, I use translators every day. And when I do Bengali, there's 37 dialects. So we might have 37 dialects with marijuana when like we have multiple strains. So there's got to be a frame for each different entity. And then there's got to be communication, and the stigma will be there for a while. It's going to take a long time. That's my short answer.
Can I offer
Thank you for that.
a little bit of feedback? Because this is kind of where my mind goes. How do we even start to heal the damage from the war on drugs, right? Because there's still that gap in conversation to even be able to start the conversation with these marginalized communities, right? And so there's a level of education that has to happen before we can even start having those conversations. And I think a lot of that research at the baseline of everything, if everything stems from research and how we move forward is based on the research, how do we start the conversation at that level of things to make sure that this is not an afterthought, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not an afterthought, but it's built into the foundation of the research that we're putting out there.
Yes.
So real quick, it depends upon the design. That's what I'm going to say. It depends upon the design and the designers. Go ahead, Cass.
Yeah, so I'd like to just say, so we're doing it right now with this conversation in a public forum, in a professional way, with, dozens of healthcare professionals currently listening to what we're talking about the stigma, talking about the impact of rescheduling, talking about the importance of not leaving people behind who have been disenfranchised, right? It's the conversations we have today before things change, and every conversation we have, whether it's filling out the public comment form, which I shared in the chat earlier, talking to your local legislature or legislator about voting, working with your local municipality on the programs that they're putting in place, because they're in many cities around the country, decriminalization is happening already, even if it's not at the state or federal level. Having those conversations and being present and supporting people when they're doing the research, when they're putting the products out, when they're asking these questions, right? And there's lots of ways that we support things, right? We support things with our thumbs up likes, right? We support things by sharing. We support things by showing up. We support things by using our dollars, right? So, we're having the conversations. We're starting it now. And we're starting it now because we showed up today, right? And I think that the more we can do on this, right, is when we're trying to think about our businesses, when we're thinking about our patients, when we're thinking about our neighbors, our friends, and our family, right? Thinking about how each one of those people is also connected to, because you are, and if you really ask yourself, you are connected to a person who's been disenfranchised by the war on drugs, right? Today. You are talking to me today. My uncle went to prison for this. If you didn't know somebody before today, Cass and Coleman. Okay. Right. And, that's just reality, right? A random person that you meet on a webinar or walking down the street has been impacted by this war. So you can do those things and start having those real honest conversations, whether it's with your friends or your neighbors or your doctor, or, the funding board at your local university.
Or your church.
Or your church, right? Or your local temple, or your community center, or you decided that you're going to go to your professional society activity, right? You're going to the nursing association, or you're at a meeting for NAMI talking about mental health and people self-medicating and saying, hey, you know what? Self-medication may actually be the answer when somebody doesn't have access to a pharmacy and a doctor. And how can we stop demonizing those conversations? Right? There's so many possibilities there. And with rescheduling, being able to have that conversation of, hey, now, you know what? They may not be drug products you can get at your pharmacy yet, but we're no longer saying there's no medical usage, right? Now we can say that for decades, people have been self-medicating with a substance that should have been medicine all along, right? Those are the kinds of conversations we can have differently today.
And there are tons of those conversations going on in communities all across America. I'm not sure about other countries, but I've been to many of them. And I go to local town halls, I speak up, and it's just putting yourself out there and having a conversation, not being afraid. And I'm talking about real fear because people will turn away from you. They'll think you're a stoner. They'll think, I mean, what are you really talking about? So my conversation about cannabis has been huge for like 7 or 8 years. And then all of a sudden, when patients no longer thought they needed to have a medical certification, at least in Michigan, we've been legal since 2008, recreational 2018. Then all of a sudden, all my patients went on a decline. As a result of that, I said, you know what? I'm going to deal with cancer and how can cannabis cure cancer. So I'm almost about to finish that blog post. I've done 2 already. But some of those issues, the medical issues, if you bring them in to a conversation and you find out a person or a patient has been using cannabis and they speak up, it's all testimonial, but those are the people that you want to engage with to be a voice for the community as well.
That's great. I'd like to go to some questions from our audience. And it looks like there's a couple here. So let's go. I'm going to go with the second question on the list just because it's more foundational and I think we can build on that. So Daniel has asked, could we get into the difference between rescheduling and legalization? You want to, Dr. Shelby Lane.
Rescheduling is rescheduling is rescheduling. It's still federally illegal. You're talking years into the future. So we talked from 1970 to 2024. So maybe it'll be 5 years, maybe it'll be 4 years, but it's not legal. And people keep telling me, friends, marijuana is legal. I'm like, it's not. That's not really. State by state, it's whatever a state decides to do. So when we start talking about research and rescheduling, like Carly said, can you go from this state to another state, take your products there, and can you do research on those products? No, you can't, not yet. It's still Schedule 1. So when is legalization coming? It's politics, it's the government, it's these conversations that Kenya talked about. We need to have those conversations. So I'm just happy. I know it's not an answer, the best answer. I'm just happy that we got to medical marijuana, marijuana research, medical marijuana, recreational, whatever we want. It's cannabis and hemp research. Now we can actually put some things into clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We can do some actual research with real patients, whether it's from a dispensary or university. And I know the University of Michigan has money for that right now. So there's research being done.
So very, very true. I think it's also worth noting that rescheduling is a form of legalization, but which still requires a prescription and still requires a controlled environment for that prescription to be delivered to you versus a completely descheduled product, which doesn't require a prescription and wouldn't require a controlled environment to get that prescription to you. So your backyard and your neighbor and your friend and your grocery store instead of your doctor's office, the pharmacy, and a pharmaceutical manufacturer.
Right.
Some more questions here. We've got, when will interstate commerce be allowed? I think Carly was really leaning to that. Can you talk a little bit more about the grand news, I thought anyway, from the drug czar Rahul Gupta, who was like, yeah, I see interstate commerce happening after rescheduling.
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal strategy, as it's not yet, I know I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Florida, and I just recently saw when I was back there visiting some family that something I was, driving towards, which was back in the day called Yes on Two, Yes on Amendment Two for legalization, is now Yes on Three. It's been so long that it's even changed. But really, living in Denver, in Colorado, in this, as you're mentioning, recreational and medical state. We have other states that are just medical. We kind of have a current view of the history of cannabis, right? What it is like in certain states that have just medical, certain states that have both. And I think that kind of helps maybe the trajectory of what we see moving forward. And sadly, it's going to be slow. It is going to be a very slow process, just, as we're seeing here, Dr. Cynthia Shelby Lane's talking about the amount of steps that regulations and what things really have to go through in black and white to really create a safe way to move these products from state to state and to, have this capability. I feel like for as long as I've been in the industry, I've been saying in the next 5 years, in the next 5 years. And I really don't have a timeline for that. But I see, again, these conversations and the ability to take these small steps, maybe not my generation, but those that are coming behind us, those that are learning at these universities that have cannabis curriculum. That's something I'm very involved in here at Community College of Denver, which has a huge BIPOC community, low income. We want to educate the next generation as well, so they can work even faster, that they can be really on top of what needs to happen, that maybe some of the current demographic of regulators just aren't really understanding, to Kenya's point.
Oh, that's great. Ernest has a question about, will more colleges and universities get involved in cannabis studies after rescheduling? I feel like you were telling me the other day about a university where you worked, where you wanted to do the work, but you couldn't. Were you talking about that earlier? Was that when you were with at Answitch?
Anschutz.
Anschutz?
So yeah, incredibly limited. There was one lab, and now they have an entire curriculum. They have a master's program for it.
Yeah.
I speak to their pharmacology students every year. It is an absolutely incredible class of just, it keeps my light on. It really keeps me moving forward, knowing that these students are really the next generation of researchers, and that even the university itself is doing its own research on some vapor emissions and some things like that nowadays. I get to go every year and speak and kind of see how far they're getting. But that being said, it is an incredibly small group of individuals that are willing to put their name, right, their PhD on the line, and have cannabis as part of their specialty. I find it to be a niche. I love this industry, and others might find it to be, something that might negate their credentials, or omit it from their credentials for, any reason, to get back into grant writing or to get back into, federally funded research. How are you going to say that you worked on research of an illicit product, and then ask the government to fund your next project?
For sure. How are you feeling about all this, Kenya?
So I have a question, because I maybe don't understand the path of research or that it takes, because in my head, cannabis research is you talking to your doctor and kind of figuring out things for you, and kind of, I mean, playing with plant medicine for yourself, not playing with it, but kind of experiencing it for yourself. But in terms of like research, like clinical research, there has to be like a totally different approach in my head. Uh, um, how how do we participate in that research? Because again, there's still that barrier. Like in my head, it goes through healthcare professionals, and we know that minorities are, there's still that health disparities in access to health and all of these things. So how, what does research actually entail, and how can we participate in that research once it is up and going?
I'll try to answer that for you, Kenya. Research starts with researchers, so people who are actually doing clinical research, not necessarily doctors all the time, or maybe PhD persons and master's persons, but at the college level or the university level or academic level, there are several colleges that are starting to do research. So by the time you get to me, a doctor, I'm not doing that research. I might read and understand the research, look at all the literature, know the articles, and report back to you. But in order to get into a clinical trial, I guess with marijuana, it's still kind of difficult. It's just like if you want to get into a cancer trial. I've done a lot of clinical trials as a patient myself, and you just find it, you sign up and you do it. I did one for COVID. And so it's not such as you go to your doctor and your doctor tells you what to do. So some of the universities now, at least in Michigan, our University of Michigan and Northern Michigan University, but then if you understand where the research is being done and you want to be involved with that, then you have to put your time in, follow up, call them, make the call, see if you qualify, that sort of research. I think it's confusing for you. I understand what's going on when you're asking the question. Like, I went to my doctor and my doctor didn't say anything, because you know what? Your doctor doesn't know.
Yeah.
Literally, your doctor doesn't know.
So I guess that's up to you. We have to be proactive about this. If we want these things to be addressed, then we have to be proactive about making sure that we address them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for most research, there's, I always say, many mice that came before you. There's
Right.
lots of animal trials,
Right.
and lots of, we want to make sure that if there are adverse health effects, that happens in an animal study and not to the level of, some of these upper level studies that include human trials, both with placebo and not. That being said, I understand that, some of the data that is acquired about humans at this point is based on reporting, right? Saying that, okay, I have lung issues, and I'm a daily cannabis user, and making those links. That being said, again, because of, the stigma, not many people will tell their doctors that they're using cannabis or using it maybe as often as they are, or in whatever style, right? And then does the doctor you're speaking to even understand that, right? If I talk to my doctor about, the difference between how much I'm dabbing and how much I'm smoking flower or blunts, they might look at me,
What?
with wide eyes of what's the difference between a joint and a blunt? And really it takes terminology and, some of these standardizations of this industry, defining these things so that the data acquired can be used, best fit.
And I think, Carly, what you said is really important, because most of the studies, if they've been done, are animal studies, and the cell culture animal studies, not human studies. It's hard to study. It's like saying, I'm going to study cannabis, but I know you're going to be high, but I don't know if I can really do a study, because I know you're going to get high. So let's do a study with alcohol. Well, you're going to, I mean, there's all sorts of things that are being done, even with alcohol as we speak. So cannabis is like in the early phases of how do you design a study for cannabis? What are you going to use? What patient population? How can you make it consistent? What will you have to throw out? Pharmaceutical companies do this all the time. And I think we talked about this before. Big Pharma is going to get involved. They're going to design a study. And Kenya, you can get in that study. You're so inclined.
Good.
But be careful, because I'm not sure what Big Pharma is going to do in terms of medical research, but they have the millions of dollars to do it.
I wanted to take a second to shout out a tool that I've been using. It's Tetragram, the Tetragram app, and it's an app where you can document your own personal experiences with different strains. You can choose the dispensary you got it at, and it actually, Otha, he has gotten together with other healthcare professionals to have a list to choose from of people who are specializing in cannabis and in exploring that in health care. So that is something that I'm trying to do actively from Texas. We don't have a lot of options here, but I'm documenting my own experiences so that I can at least be an expert on myself and advocate for myself when I'm going into these doctor's offices to talk about cannabis, because it's still hard to have the conversation with science people, because the language is just there's such a disparity in the language that I speak and sometimes the language that you guys speak.
So I'm going to backtrack once again, because I'm very interested in can cannabis cure cancer? And I looked at what oncologists think about cannabis. And so 30% of oncologists reportedly say to their patients, okay, if you want to use it, if you feel better, if it helps your appetite and your weight, go ahead and use it. But that 30% has not had any education in cannabis at all. The few that have, and there are a few at USC, Dr. Abrams, there's UCLA, there's Johns Hopkins, there's Harvard even, they are telling patients who are on immunotherapy that you cannot use cannabis because it interferes with the metabolism of the drug. So you have to know those things. So oncologists are very important as we go forward with the research, although I'm sure oncologists are not going to give up their chemotherapy. So there is a divide there. Like, can you use cannabis to cure this cancer, or should you use my chemotherapy? Can you use cannabis with the chemotherapy? Possibly, possibly not. Do we really know? We don't know.
We have a few more questions that have been coming through the question app. I would like to, because we were just talking about the language of scientists and how we want to bridge that divide. Let's go with a really scientist-based question, and see if we can try to get this one answered. So this one came in from Sherry Strong. With THC, it's impossible to perform a randomized controlled trial because of the psychoactivity. This is a problem with clinical trials for psychedelics as well. How do we move forward? I would just like to share that in the mid-2000s, I was fully capable of doing clinical trials with THC that were approved by the FDA and were allowed to be performed with GW Pharma. Like, these trials have been done. It is possible. Is it harder? Of course it's harder. Do you have really weird placebo effects from people who are definitely not on any drugs? 100%. But this is something that happens all the time. I would love to hear from Cynthia or Carly on their experiences as well with, reading about double-blind trials, as well as, any work that you did in your previous practice.
Carly, go ahead with that. I'm trying to answer something
Okay,
else.
yeah. So I can kind of speak to, I had a University of Anschutz, University of Colorado Anschutz medical doctor come in to speak to one of my classes about this, trying to, again, bridge that gap. And they were doing trials on mice, impregnated mice, to look at exactly to the point earlier, risk, right? What is the risk of cannabis consumption on a pregnant individual, and in this case, mice. And I think they did a really great job at breaking down, positivities, negativities. They saw fatter tissues in some of the mice that were born of these impregnated cases, and not really a whole lot of effects. And, my class was incredible at kind of poking some holes into the study itself. Instead of being given hemp seed oil, other mice were just gavaged with oils. And my students were like, I mean, that's a lot of oil to be giving to a pregnant individual. And maybe that's what's causing some of these things. So really, even in reading the current research and literature, and even being presented some of this information of what's going on, because some of these individuals are not cannabis users, my students were able to pretty quickly poke some holes in that. Cannabis and hemp seed oil, the seeds have a lot of fat and much less protein. And, that's totally different than some of these probable uses of cannabis in a medical way. So really, truthfully, the links there, even from some of the doctors, right? They're not using exactly what we see in the cannabis industry. We're not making these mice smoke, right? But lots of, I mean, I've seen it even with my friends who are pregnant, who come to me, right, as the expert, and I'm not a medical doctor. You know, I've been nauseous for days. Can I smoke? You know, I'm losing weight because I'm so nauseous, and I know that's not good for my baby. Can I smoke? Can I have an edible? You know, there is a long way to go, and we're really just at the start of some of these research opportunities. And it is, again, going to take a much greater community that is open to saying, like, okay, I'm a consumer and nobody dabs like that. Or I'm a consumer and nobody consumes that much or that even maybe little. And really honing, see the thumbs going up, honing in some of these trials and the details around these trials when it comes to real use in the real world.
Oh, Carly, thank you so much for that. I love real world implications of the work that we're doing, right? Oh, it's good to know. Speaking of the real world, David K has a question, which I think often comes up for all of us in the Scientific Advisory Committee. So Kenya, if you never have heard about this, just wait. Okay, it'll start rearing its head in Texas sometime soon. What does the panel think about all the issues with laboratory testing, namely no common standards, THC level shopping, fraud, lack of regulatory oversight, etc.? And I just like to remind everyone, in case you're not aware and you're not a scientist who's going to be with me in Philadelphia next week, literally writing and voting on international voluntary consensus standards with ASTM, with D37 for cannabis. These standards exist. We wrote them. As a community, we wrote them together. We validated them using interlaboratory science studies. The work has been done. The next step is convincing other people to use the standards that we've written across the board. And how do you guys think rescheduling will impact that conversation?
I think I can. Oh, go ahead, Kenya.
This is just this has been a huge topic of conversation in a lot of groups that I am in, mainly with Michigan and testing and conversion oil and all of this other stuff. And as a consumer, like, who works in the industry, like, I hear people talking about this every day and I have no idea what they're talking about. I couldn't imagine, like, being a consumer and even knowing what questions to ask about testing. So I am so excited to hear what your response is here.
And really, it makes my job very difficult. We have machines in many different states that reduce microbial contamination loads. I work with clients all over the country and in other countries to assist them in their understanding of the microbes within their cultivation. And every state regulates different ones. So before I get on any call, I'm looking at that regulatory map to see if this state tests for bile-tolerant gram-negatives, if this state tests for aspergillus, do they test for total yeast and mold? What is that limit, right? And so really, again, a meeting of the minds to determine the best fit for the United States of America as a whole versus piece by piece by piece, and kind of seeing the results because of those differences within the medical community, really, I think, is something that can help this uniformity and, gosh, just to make a lot of our jobs easier. There's many multi-state operators that have to keep their brains so separated for each of their cultivations and have to act differently in each of their cultivations based on their ability or their threshold of certain contaminants. And it really, I think, even when it comes to, potency shopping, microbial, we could call it shopping, really people who are looking to pass tests because of financial, obligation to a company, it really is so piecemeal. This lab's using this technology, this lab's using a different technology because they have different limitations, and that technology has different limitations. Again, ASTM, incredible, voluntary. Anyone can be a part of ASTM. It's a very small, very small. I think it's an application fee, and you can vote and write your own standards, and do it in a way that will only move forward when everyone can agree. And I think that is really the best part about that.
Yeah,
For sure.
Kenya, you had a question about what do all of these tests mean as a consumer? I think the bottom line is safety, safety for the consumer. I was at a testing lab in Oakland. I don't know if it still exists, several years ago, and going through the lab and looking in the refrigerator at the petri dishes, and they were growing mold, and then one of the PhD scientists said, "Well, we has anybody ever died from cannabis?" And they said, "Well, indirectly, they didn't test a product and had mold, and the person had an autoimmune disorder and died from that particular mold." So testing is really important. Consumption by the consumer. I mean, the government intends to protect us. Whether they do that or not all the time effectively is a different story, but that's the assumption, and it's for safety, no matter what test you're doing and how it's marijuana is being concocted or made or whatever. So it's for safety.
And sadly, it'll be too late when we figure out, was it safe or not?
Yeah.
Oregon has voted against having aspergillus testing. And, do we see in 10, 15 years an increase in lung infections in people who have used cannabis in Oregon? That's the risk that we take. And really, in my opinion, safety comes first, especially when it comes to cannabis. We really need to keep to that this is a safe product, to kind of continue down this path of considering it a safe drug, considering it safe for consumption by, a majority of people over 21, things of that nature.
And children.
Right on, and children.
And children.
So as we come to the end of the end of the hour here, I would love us all to kind of have something we want to say that we want to register in everybody's mind as they go for the rest of the day. So I'm going to start in the upper corner here of my screen. Kenya, what do you want people to be thinking about for the rest of their day?
Oh my gosh. So Kristen McFarland of the Source Marketing Group made a good post on LinkedIn the other day, and it was a quote from Arlen Hamilton, who's a Black investor. But she said, when one group of people dominates the industry or multiple industry, the consequences can be far-reaching and dangerous. We see it in the medical world where textbooks for doctors only describe the way a rash looks on white skin. We see it in the auto industry where seatbelts weren't designed for women's bodies. We see it in emerging technology where automated soap dispensers and self-driving cars don't recognize Black skin. What that means is if we can change who gets to lead, who gets to decide what is worthy of new idea or what to invest in, and who we get to turn these ideas into reality in these industries, we can change the world. We have a unique opportunity in the cannabis industry to do that, and I'm passionate about it, and I think that this should be a topic in every conversation.
All right, Carly.
I definitely, feel Kenya, the tears were right there. I felt that, coming through your throat. And really, I get choked up in the same way where, for me, science and safety come first. This medicine is going to save lives of all individuals. Again, in the same way Casson mentioned that she knows someone who has been incarcerated, I want for the future that everyone knows someone who is saved by this plant medicine, their mental health, their physical well-being. And so for me, science and safety come first, working together, leaving opinions to the side, really pushing facts over, anything else, and hoping that the government really supports science in that way.
Awesome. Love supporting science. Dr. Shelby Lane.
Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up today. Love you all. Um, Science is fun. So with cannabis rescheduling, there's going to be increased research, and rescheduling would allow for more research into the medical uses of marijuana, which we don't really have full knowledge of. There's a potential for new products with FDA regulation and approval that could create a legal market for different categories of marijuana products, including possibly big pharma prescription drugs. There will be no change in recreational use with rescheduling. It does not legalize marijuana at the federal level. And this impact of rescheduling is gradual. It will take time, and we need the public's input. Please give your input, no matter where it is. And if you have negative comments about it, let us know. We want to know so we can be able to do this well.
So good. And I would love to leave you guys with the future is now. Okay. This was, when I started this journey in 1996, we weren't where we are today, but the future is now. And visualize the future. The future is you can buy cannabis that's safe, just like you can buy aspirin or tomatoes or, Cheerios or Dr. Pepper. That's the future. Brian, take it away.
Mic drop moment right there. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Cass. I think everyone got a perfect, crystal clear example of why you were the recipient of our Excellence in Advocacy Award this year. I really appreciate all of your engagement, support, and work spearheading these committees and these initiatives this year and in the last few years in particular. As always, we're going to just close out the session by giving you all a quick preview of some upcoming activities and initiatives that we all need and want your involvement in. All of you all just saw the pop-up poll that requested if you would like to be registered for the next episode in this series. We're taking 1 week off, but we'll be hitting the road, or we'll be hitting the ground running with another session, episode 3, that's going to be headed by our Facility Design Committee later this month on June 18th. Make sure to mark your calendars. And if you didn't respond yes, you'll be getting some more information as to why you need to attend this session as well. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Just a quick note as well to mark your calendars for next year's 13th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days. It's been sort of all hands on deck over the last few weeks as the rescheduling announcement coincided with the final day of our Lobby Day event. So we couldn't have been more excited to really see some amazing momentum generated with the support of our dedicated members and committee members, such as you see here on the call today in DC last month. Huge thank you to the 35 member companies that signed on to support that event and made it so successful. And if you all enjoyed our return to the educational programming that you've been seeing here on all of these webinars, as well as our initial stakeholder summits that were held in California, Missouri, Maryland, and Colorado earlier this year, stay tuned for a special announcement of some September and October editions, where we'll be bringing back these events to our most established markets and some of the most emerging markets that we really need to ensure that we are spreading the word about NCIA and the importance of membership. And then last but not least, a quick note to the 15 or 20 so current NCIA members that I saw here on the room today. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to learn how to maximize your membership, mark your calendars for the 3rd week of June or next Thursday. And we'll be doing our monthly member orientations featuring our membership team. It's the best way for you to spend 30 minutes to learn how to plug into your NCIA member portal and get the most out of the amazing benefit package that you are offered. All right. Thank you all again for joining us today for the 2nd episode of NCIA's Industry Essentials webinar series, Committee Insights, Advancing Cannabis Science, Research Opportunities, and Challenges Post-Rescheduling. We hope you found this session insightful and valuable. Huge thank you to our expert speakers that shared this crucial information on consumer safety, the impact of rescheduling on research and development, and the importance of standardized testing protocols. Huge shout out to you in particular, Kenya, for joining us to ensure that the DEI perspective was not only highlighted, but was an integral part of today's conversation. So thank you for helping co-moderate the conversation as far as I saw it alongside Cass. You all were an excellent dynamic duo there. So I really appreciate you all playing off of each other and ensuring that all of the perspectives across NCIA's membership are represented today. If you missed any part of today's webinar or you wanted access to the slide deck that we debuted at the beginning of the session, just stay on the lookout for a recap blog and the full recording to be sent to your email inbox shortly. And if you did miss episode 1, to sort of set the stage for today's conversation, don't worry, you can head to NCIA's website after today's call to dive back into that session as well. We thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you for sticking around a few minutes after the hour, and we look forward to seeing you for episode 3 later this month. In between now and then, if you ever have any questions about NCIA membership, any of the panelists on this call are absolute excellent ambassadors for NCIA, and you can reach NCIA at info@thecannabisindustry.org anytime. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Bye, everybody.